Hello and welcome. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Take a moment to glance at your clock, maybe stretch a little and get comfortable. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel so you can get a fresh dose of calm and relaxing history stories every night. It's a gentle way to unwind and drift off to sleep, story by story. Now, take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the quiet settle around you like a soft blanket. The world outside may be rushing, but here, with this story, there's no hurry at all. God, imagine stepping back nearly 2,000 years into a time when the city of Rome was the heart of a vast empire stretching across continents. The streets bustle with traders shouting in a dozen different languages. The scent of freshly baked bread mingles with the smell of the Tiber River, and legionnaires in gleaming armor march with a steady rhythm. But beneath the grandeur and power, life in the Roman Empire was harsh, unforgiving, and unlike anything most of us would be prepared for today. If you think your morning commute is tough, or that the pressures of modern life are unbearable, just wait until you hear what it was like to live and survive in the Roman world. In fact, it's likely you wouldn't last a single day. From the scorching summer heat to the crowded insulae apartments where the poor lived, from brutal public punishments to the constant threat of disease and war, the Roman Empire demanded toughness, endurance, and an acceptance of hardship that few today could manage. In this story, we'll slowly walk through the daily life of an average Roman citizen and uncover why modern comforts have made us soft in comparison. So lean back, close your eyes if you wish, and let the story carry you to a world long past, but never forgotten. Hello and welcome. Before we begin, take a moment to notice where you are right now. What time is it on your clock? Are you cozy in bed or sitting somewhere quiet? Wherever you are, thank you for joining me here. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every day, I share calming, slow-paced history stories designed to help you relax and gently drift off to sleep. So if you're looking for a peaceful way to end your day, I'd love to have you along for the journey. Now, take a deep breath in. Let it out slowly. Feel the weight of your body sink into your chair or mattress. Let your shoulders soften. This moment is just for you, a chance to step away from the noise and rush of modern life. Imagine stepping back in time, almost 2,000 years, to the heart of the ancient world, the city of Rome, the capital of one of the greatest empires in history, a place of towering marble buildings, sprawling marketplaces, and endless activity. But life there was nothing like our own. There were no cars, no phones, no hospitals as we know them. Instead, there were crowded streets filled with carts, shouting vendors, and a constant mix of smells, some pleasant, like fresh bread, and others far less so. The Roman Empire stretched across continents, from the sun-baked deserts of North Africa to the misty forests of Northern Europe. It connected diverse peoples, languages, and cultures, all ruled from the eternal city. Yet despite its power and wealth, daily life was brutal. If you imagine yourself as a visitor dropped into that world without any warning, you'd quickly realize you wouldn't last a day. Let's explore why, slowly and carefully, so you can almost feel what it would have been like, without the danger, of course. Just the atmosphere, the sounds, and the struggles of a Roman's everyday life. The unforgiving streets of Rome. Walking through the streets of ancient Rome was an assault on the senses. The sun beat down mercilessly in summer, making the cobblestones burn hot beneath bare feet. Narrow alleys twisted between buildings piled high, blocking the breeze and trapping heat. The air was thick with smoke from open fires and the stench of waste. Remember, there was no modern sewage system. Garbage and human waste often flowed openly in the streets or into the Tiber River, which many Romans also used for drinking water. The city was crowded beyond anything we might imagine today. At its height, Rome had over 1 million inhabitants, many living in insulae, tall, cramped apartment buildings that could rise 6 or 7 stories high. These buildings were often poorly constructed and dangerous, prone to fires and collapses. Imagine sharing a small, dark room with your entire family. Cooking was done over open flames, so every day was a risk. One careless spark could turn your home into ashes. Before you had time to react, you'd hear the noise of carts clattering on the stones, street vendors shouting their wares in Latin, Greek, and other languages, and the ever-present chatter of neighbors close enough to hear every word. Privacy was almost non-existent. Harsh living conditions and poverty. Not everyone in Rome lived in luxury. In fact, most did not. While the wealthy enjoyed grand villas with running water and baths, the majority struggled to survive. The poor often worked as laborers, market sellers, or servants with little security or steady income. Food was simple and sometimes scarce. Bread, olives, and whatever vegetables could be grown or imported cheaply. Meat was a rare luxury. Water was fetched from public fountains or the aqueducts, but clean water was limited. Bathhouses offered a chance to clean oneself, but they were crowded, and hygiene standards were very different from ours. Disease was a constant threat. Epidemics spread quickly in the crowded city, where rats and flies thrived. The concept of germs was unknown, so sickness could devastate entire neighborhoods. The threat of violence and punishment in the Roman Empire. The law was harsh and public punishments brutal. Crime was met with severe consequences, often carried out in public. To serve as a warning, thieves could be whipped or branded, and slaves were subject to even harsher treatment. The Roman arena was a place of spectacle where criminals, prisoners of war, and gladiators fought, sometimes to the death. If you offended the wrong person or fell afoul of local authorities, you could face exile, forced labor, or execution. Justice was swift and merciless. Imagine the constant anxiety of living under such a system, where one misstep could mean a horrific public fate. The endless work and duty. For most Romans, life meant endless work, either in the fields, workshops, or as soldiers defending the empire's borders. The Roman army was the backbone of the empire's power, but being a legionnaire meant years of harsh discipline, long marches, and deadly battles. The average soldier was far from the heroic image we often imagine. Many faced brutal conditions and little chance of rest. Civilians, too, faced heavy taxes and demands from the government. Failure to meet these could mean imprisonment or worse. Even leisure was limited and often rough. Public festivals and games were occasions for escape, but could also turn violent or chaotic. Why you wouldn't last a day so? Why wouldn't you last a day in the Roman Empire? Because the world was relentlessly tough, physically, mentally, and socially. Your modern comforts, running water, sanitation, healthcare, food variety, and safety would vanish instantly. You'd be exposed to heat, disease, hunger, and fear on a scale hard to imagine today. The demands on your body and spirit would crush most people unprepared for such a life. The constant noise, the danger, the lack of privacy and hygiene, all would wear you down quickly. Take another deep breath now. Imagine slowly stepping out of that ancient world, leaving behind the crowded streets and harsh sun. Let the peaceful quiet of your own space come back. Before we move deeper into the world of ancient Rome, take a moment to settle in. Breathe slowly. Feel the calm in your body. If you're enjoying these stories, remember to subscribe. That way, you can get fresh, relaxing history narratives every day to help you unwind and sleep peacefully. Now, let's continue our journey into the Roman Empire, exploring what daily life looked like and why living there would push almost anyone to their limits. Morning in the Roman city, imagine waking up early in Rome, just as the first light of dawn brushes the city's rooftops. The air is still cool, but the city is already stirring. If you lived in a wealthy household, your morning might begin in a large atrium, a wide room open to the sky, where water collected in a small pool, helping cool the air. Servants would be preparing your breakfast: bread, cheese, olives, and perhaps some fruit. But for the average Roman, the day started in a small, cramped apartment or a simple house. You might have shared your living space with many family members. Privacy was rare. You'd hear the sounds of neighbors waking, doors creaking open, and street vendors setting up their stalls. The daily hustle, jobs and responsibilities. Most Romans had jobs that demanded physical strength and endurance. The city was filled with laborers, craftsmen, traders, and farmers who supplied food and goods. A blacksmith's workshop echoed with hammer strikes on metal, while bakers worked tirelessly to feed the growing population. Marketplaces bustled, with people buying and selling everything from spices to cloth. If you were a soldier, your day started with rigorous training and discipline. Soldiers were the empire's backbone, defending its borders and expanding its reach. But their life was far from glamorous. Long marches, harsh punishments for mistakes, and brutal combat were common. Meals, simple but important meals in Rome, varied widely depending on your social status. The poor might eat a simple breakfast of bread dipped in olive oil, with a little cheese or fruit if they were lucky. The midday meal, called the prodrome, was light, maybe some cold leftovers or a small portion of vegetables. Dinner was the main meal, eaten in the late afternoon or early evening. For the wealthy, dinners were grand affairs, with multiple courses, exotic spices, wine, and entertainment. But for many, dinner was modest: porridge, beans, vegetables, and occasionally some fish or meat if they could afford it. Sanitation, hygiene. A daily challenge in modern times. We take running water and toilets for granted. In Rome, this was a constant struggle. Wealthy homes sometimes had private baths and toilets, connected to the city's sophisticated aqueduct system. Public bathhouses were a popular place to clean up, socialize, and relax. But the poor had limited access to clean water. Many used chamber pots or public latrines, large rooms with stone benches full of holes where people sat side by side. With little privacy, water was poured to carry waste away into the sewer system. But smells and diseases were common. Street cleaning was minimal. Garbage piled up in alleys, and rats were everywhere. This contributed to the spread of illnesses like dysentery, typhoid, and malaria. The social divide. Rich versus poor Roman society was sharply divided. At the top were senators, wealthy landowners, and powerful merchants. Below them were craftsmen, soldiers, freedmen, and slaves. If you were poor, life was a daily struggle. You worked hard, earned little, and had few rights. Your home might be a tiny apartment in a crowded block, often unsafe and noisy. The rich, on the other hand, lived in large houses with beautiful gardens, running water, and slaves to care for their every need. They hosted lavish parties and influenced politics. But even wealth couldn't protect people from disease or political intrigue. The empire was full of danger, both visible and hidden. Slavery. The harsh reality slavery was an accepted part of Roman life. Millions of slaves worked as household servants, laborers, miners, and even teachers. Life as a slave was difficult and often cruel. Punishments were harsh, and slaves had little control over their futures. Some were prisoners of war, others born into slavery. While some skilled slaves might earn their freedom, most lived with constant fear and hard labor. Families were often separated. For a free person, the sight of slaves everywhere was normal, but it also reminded them of the fragility of their own freedom. The role of women in Rome had limited rights compared to men. Most were expected to marry, bear children, and manage the household. Wealthy women could influence society through their families, and sometimes through politics indirectly, but they had little legal power. Poor women often worked alongside their husbands or took on jobs like selling goods or weaving cloth. Life was physically demanding, and social expectations were strict. Entertainment. A brief escape, despite hardships, Romans loved entertainment. The Colosseum hosted gladiator fights, brutal contests where fighters battled to the death for public amusement. The Circus Maximus was the site for chariot races, drawing crowds of tens of thousands. These events were loud, dangerous, and thrilling. Theaters offered plays, often comedies or tragedies. Public baths were social hubs. Festivals and religious ceremonies provided rare moments of joy and community. Yet these entertainments also reflected the empire's harshness. Violence, competition, and displays of power were central. Religion and belief. Religion was woven into every part of Roman life. The Romans worshipped many gods and spirits, seeking favor through rituals and sacrifices. Temples dotted the city, and priests played important roles. People believed in fate and the power of the gods to influence everything from harvests to battles. 4. Some religion provided comfort. For others, it was a source of fear and obligation. Disease and medical care. Medical knowledge was limited. Doctors used herbs, potions, and rudimentary surgeries. Public health measures were minimal. Plagues could devastate populations. The dense, unsanitary conditions made infections common and deadly. Child mortality was high, and life expectancy was low by modern standards. If you fell seriously ill, chances were slim you would recover. The constant threat of war. The Roman Empire was nearly always at war or preparing for war. Borders were guarded by legions. If you lived near a frontier, raids and battles were frighteningly common. Soldiers lived harsh lives, but so did civilians caught in the path of armies. War shaped the empire's politics, economy, and daily life, reminding everyone of danger and instability. Food shortages and famine. Despite Rome's vast resources, food shortages were not uncommon. Poor harvests, bad weather, or war disrupted supply lines. Grain was a critical food staple, and the government sometimes distributed free or subsidized grain to keep the city fed and prevent unrest. Famine struck periodically, causing hunger and suffering. Summary: a world of challenge and hardship. Life in the Roman Empire was a constant test of resilience. The city's grandeur hid a world where daily survival required toughness and acceptance of discomfort. Heat, cold, hunger, disease, violence, and hard work shaped every moment. For a modern person, these conditions would feel unbearable. Take a moment now. Breathe deeply. Let your mind float away from the noise and struggle of ancient Rome. Imagine waking in ancient Rome, the sun just rising and spilling soft golden light across stone rooftops. The city is beginning to stir, though the sounds are muffled compared to the busy day ahead. The air carries a mixture of scents: fresh bread baking, damp stone from the early morning dew, and something less pleasant, like the lingering odor from the previous day's waste. You might be sharing a small, cramped room in an insula, surrounded by neighbors whose voices and footsteps are never far away. Privacy doesn't exist in the way you know it now. Thin walls do little to block noise, and the bustling city sounds mingle with everyday life. Your morning starts simply. There is no gentle alarm or comforting cup of tea. Perhaps you rise to fetch water from a distant fountain, balancing a clay jug carefully on your head or hip. The path might already be crowded with early risers, bakers carrying trays of warm bread, merchants setting up their stalls, children running noisily through narrow streets. Food is plain and scarce. Maybe a small piece of bread dipped in olive oil, or some dried fruit if fortune smiles. For most, luxury is a foreign concept. Rich Romans dine on exotic spices and meats, but the common folk make do with beans, lentils, and whatever vegetables are available. The sun climbs higher, turning the city hot and sticky. Without modern fans or air conditioning, Romans endured sweltering days, seeking shade under awnings or retreating to the cooler baths if they could afford it. For many, this heat was oppressive, making daily work even more exhausting. Imagine now the grind of everyday tasks. If you are a craftsman, your hands are raw and worn by constant labor. If a soldier, your muscles ache from endless drills and marches. If a merchant, you negotiate loudly in the crowded marketplace, trying to sell goods for a meager profit. The air is thick with dust and smoke from hearth fires, and the risk of illness is always near. Without knowledge of germs, people live closely with waste and filth. The Tiber River, source of water for many, is also a sewer carrying human and animal waste downstream. Drinking water is often contaminated, leading to disease outbreaks that sweep through the city. Despite these hardships, life goes on. Romans find moments of joy in festivals, religious ceremonies, and public games. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmers, political rivalries, social inequalities, and the looming threat of violence. One wrong word or action can lead to brutal punishment. The law is harsh, and public executions are not uncommon. Gladiators fight in the Colosseum for survival, their blood staining the sands as thousands watch in a mix of horror and excitement. Slaves, numbering in the millions, live under constant fear. Their lives are owned by others, with little hope of freedom. Families are torn apart, and cruelty is a daily reality. Yet even slaves contribute to the empire's power, building roads, tending fields, and maintaining households. Women, though often limited by social customs, find ways to influence family and society. They manage homes, raise children, and in rare cases, wield power behind the scenes. But their lives, too, are shaped by the demands of a patriarchal world. As evening falls, the city doesn't quiet as much as you might expect. Lamps are lit, casting flickering shadows along streets and homes. Conversations continue late into the night. Markets sometimes operate after dark, and the promise of rest is tempered by worries about the next day. Sleep might come fitfully in noisy, crowded conditions. Disease, hunger, and fear are never far away, haunting the minds of those who close their eyes. In this world, comfort is a luxury few know. Survival depends on endurance, toughness, and a certain acceptance of hardship. For a person from today, accustomed to safety, privacy, and ease, this life would be overwhelming. You would be exposed to dangers and discomforts on every side. The Roman Empire was not a gentle place to live, and that harshness seeped into every aspect of daily life. If you found yourself waking up in the city of Rome, or any of its provinces, without preparation, the challenges would begin immediately. The noise, the smells, the sheer crowding, all could overwhelm you before the sun even climbed high. Most people lived in buildings called insulae. These were essentially ancient apartment blocks, often several stories high, packed tightly along narrow streets. Constructed quickly and with little regard for safety, these buildings were notorious for collapsing or catching fire. The danger was ever present. Firefighters, called the vigils, were a constant presence in the city, but their equipment was rudimentary. Often, fires burned unchecked until they consumed entire blocks. Imagine living in a small room with your family, with thin walls that barely shielded you from the neighbors' arguments, the clatter of carts on stone roads, or the braying of animals in the streets. Privacy was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Most Romans shared space with multiple relatives, or even strangers, their lives intertwined in the cramped quarters. Sanitation was another major problem. although Rome boasted impressive aqueducts that delivered fresh water to public fountains. And baths, sewage management was primitive. Waste was commonly dumped into the streets or rivers, and public latrines were communal, offering little privacy. The stench was overwhelming and constant. Flies and rats thrived, making disease outbreaks inevitable. Diseases such as dysentery, typhoid, and malaria were common killers. Medicine was primitive and often ineffective. Physicians relied on herbal remedies and rudimentary surgeries, but their understanding of illness was limited. The concept of infection was unknown, so practices that might spread disease, like reusing contaminated instruments or failing to isolate the sick, were widespread. Food security was precarious for most. Grain was the staple of the Roman diet, especially for the lower classes, but it was subject to shortages. Crop failures, poor harvests, or political unrest could disrupt supplies, leading to famine. The government sometimes provided free or subsidized grain to the poor to prevent unrest, but this system was fragile that the wealthy feasted on exotic foods, dormice, peacock, oysters, imported spices from far-off lands. But such luxuries were beyond the reach of the majority. Instead, a typical meal for the common citizen might be porridge, beans, vegetables, and the occasional bit of fish or meat if affordable. Life for slaves was even harsher. Slavery was deeply embedded in Roman society, with millions enslaved throughout the empire. Slaves could be found in almost every sector: domestic servants, miners, farm laborers, and skilled artisans. Their treatment varied, but cruelty was common. Harsh punishments, long hours, and a complete lack of personal freedom defined their existence. Families could be separated at any time, as slaves were bought and sold like property. The legal system offered little protection to the lower classes or slaves. Punishments were severe and public to serve as deterrents. Criminals faced whipping, branding, exile, or execution. Gladiatorial combat was a grim spectacle where prisoners, slaves, and condemned men fought sometimes to the death to entertain the masses. The crowd's cheers often mingled with cries of pain and fear. Women, though central to family life, had limited rights. Marriage and childbirth defined much of their roles, with social expectations emphasizing obedience and chastity. Wealthy women could wield some influence through family connections, but legally they remained under male authority. Poor women often contributed to household income by working in markets or as craftspeople, but faced significant social constraints. The city's atmosphere was one of constant movement and noise. Markets bustled with merchants and buyers shouting across stalls. The streets filled with carts, pedestrians, animals, and sometimes soldiers on patrol. Despite the chaos, Romans valued public life highly, frequenting baths, theaters, and festivals. Yet beneath this vibrancy lay an ever-present awareness of fragility. Fire, disease, political intrigue, and violence could disrupt lives suddenly. And without warning, travel was dangerous and uncomfortable. Roads connected the empire's vast territories, but bandits and wild animals posed threats. Inns were often dirty and overcrowded. Journeys took days or weeks, depending on distance, exposing travelers to harsh weather and illness. Military service was demanding and brutal. Soldiers endured harsh training, discipline, and the constant threat of battle. Though the army was a path to social advancement for some, the life of a legionnaire was unforgiving. Many never returned home. Taxes were heavy and persistent. The empire required vast resources to maintain its infrastructure and armies. Common people often bore the brunt, paying in money, goods, or labor. Failure to meet obligations could result in fines or imprisonment. Despite all these hardships, Romans took pride in their empire. The grand architecture, laws, and cultural achievements inspired loyalty and identity. The spectacle of public events, the games, triumphs, and religious ceremonies united citizens in shared experience. However temporary, but for anyone unfamiliar with this world, unprepared for its demands, survival would be a daily struggle. The comforts of modern life, running water, healthcare, personal security, were non-existent. Life was often short, painful, and uncertain. If dropped into ancient Rome without warning, most people would succumb quickly to illness, injury, or the many dangers lurking in the streets. The empire was a place where only the tough, the lucky, or the well-connected could thrive. As evening fell, the city's noises faded only slightly. Lamps flickered in windows and street corners. Conversations continued late, business settled, and some sought leisure in the bathhouses or taverns. But many others faced long nights filled with hunger, worry, or exhaustion. In this world, every day was a challenge, and survival itself was an achievement. The life of an average Roman was shaped by routines that seem harsh by today's standards, but were simply the fabric of existence back then. Mornings could be cold and damp, especially in winter months when the stone buildings held in the chill and the fog rolled through narrow alleys. The day began early. Most people rose with the first light or before, often without a soft mattress or warm blankets to ease the awakening. The floor beneath was hard, sometimes just packed earth or rough stone. It was common for many to share a small bed or sleeping area, squeezed tightly with family members, or in poorer homes with animals. After rising, the first task was often to collect water. Though Rome had remarkable aqueducts supplying the city, water did not flow directly into most homes. People carried heavy jugs from public fountains or cisterns. This simple chore could take a significant portion of time and energy, especially if the fountains were crowded or far away. Once water was secured, the preparation of food began. Cooking was done over open fires or in communal ovens. The smell of burning wood mixed with smoke filled the air. Firewood was valuable, and conserving it was necessary. Many families ate simple meals with bread as a staple, often dipped in olive oil or accompanied by cheese or vegetables. Meat was a luxury rarely afforded by the poor. Work awaited almost everyone. Craftsmen, bakers, shoemakers, and laborers took to their tasks early. Markets opened, and the city hummed with trade and commerce. Some worked as porters, carrying goods to and from ships or warehouses. Others repaired buildings or maintained roads and aqueducts. In rural areas, peasants labored in fields, facing the same challenges of weather, pests, and poor tools that farmers have faced for centuries. The land was the source of survival, but it was unforgiving. Children contributed too, often working alongside parents or learning trades from apprenticeships. Education was a privilege for the wealthy, and most children, especially girls and those from poor families, had little formal schooling. Instead, they learned practical skills needed for survival. The midday heat drove many indoors or to shaded public spaces. Bathhouses became social hubs where Romans bathed, exercised, and exchanged news. For those who could afford it, the baths were a respite, with warm pools and massages. For many others, the baths were crowded and less inviting. Disease lurked everywhere. Poor hygiene and close living quarters made infections and epidemics common. Doctors were limited in skill and tools, and cures were often based on superstition rather than science. Death was a frequent visitor, especially for children and the elderly. Slavery permeated every level of society. Slaves were the workforce behind much of the city's operation. While some were treated relatively well, many endured brutal conditions. The fear of punishment and the lack of freedom shaped their existence. The wealthy lived differently, but were not immune to the dangers of the empire. Political intrigue, assassination, and betrayal were common among elites. Maintaining power required vigilance and often cruelty. Despite the stark realities, Romans cherished their culture, gods, and traditions. Festivals brought the city together, even if only temporarily masking the underlying tensions. The grandeur of temples and public buildings was a testament to the empire's ambitions and pride. But for most, daily life was a balance between hope and hardship, community, and survival. The streets of Rome were a constant swirl of life, but also of risk. Imagine stepping outside your cramped insula and navigating through crowds of people, carts, animals, and the ever-present chaos. The roads, paved but often uneven and littered with debris, were bustling with merchants hawking goods from across the empire. Spices from the east, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Hispania, and fabrics dyed in vibrant colors. But the city was not a safe place. Pickpockets and thieves were common, taking advantage of the crowds and narrow alleys. Law enforcement was limited, with vigils serving primarily as fire watchers and basic city guards. Crime often went unpunished unless it was serious enough. To catch the attention of officials, the risk of injury was high. Horses and carts collided. People tripped on uneven stones. Animals sometimes broke free and charged through the streets. Medical help was sparse, and injuries that are minor today could become deadly without proper care. Children played in these dangerous streets, their laughter a brief contrast to the harshness surrounding them. Education was mostly for the privileged. Most children learned trades from parents or worked from a young age, contributing to their family's survival. In the markets, the variety of goods was astonishing. Fish from the Mediterranean, grains from Egypt, silks from Asia, and wines from distant vineyards filled stalls and storage rooms. But behind this abundance was a complex and fragile supply chain. Poor weather, piracy, or war could disrupt deliveries, causing shortages and price spikes that hit the poor the hardest. Roman religion influenced every aspect of life. Temples dedicated to gods like Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and many others dotted the city. Public ceremonies, sacrifices, and festivals were both religious duties and social events. Many Romans believed the favor of the gods was essential to personal and political success. Despite the grandeur, superstition was common. Omens, dreams, and rituals shaped decisions. Failure to honor the gods properly could bring disaster, or so people believed. Public entertainment offered a brief escape from daily struggles. The Colosseum was a focal point for grand spectacles, gladiatorial games, wild beast hunts, and executions. Though brutal, these events were immensely popular and often sponsored by wealthy elites seeking public favor. The Circus Maximus drew enormous crowds for chariot races. Fans cheered and jeered in passionate displays of loyalty to different teams, often leading to violent clashes. Theaters staged dramas that both entertained and reinforced social values. Despite harsh living conditions, Romans valued culture and art. Family life was complex. Households could include not only immediate family, but slaves, freedmen, and extended relatives. The paterfamilias, or male head of the household, held significant authority. His word was law within the home. Marriage was often arranged for social or economic reasons rather than love. Women managed household affairs, but had limited legal independence. Social mobility was difficult, but possible. Successful merchants, soldiers, or freed slaves could improve their status, though entrenched aristocratic families dominated politics. The constant tension between social classes, combined with political rivalries and external threats, made Rome a city of both opportunity and danger. For those unfamiliar with such a world, the daily reality would be relentless. Physical labor, poor living conditions, the threat of violence and disease, all tested the limits of endurance. The empire's vastness brought wealth and diversity, but also challenges in governance and security. border provinces often faced. Invasions and rebellions in cities. Unrest sometimes erupted into riots or protests, often triggered by food shortages or political disputes. For the average Roman, life was a daily negotiation between hardship and hope. In the heart of Rome, Italy, life was shaped by constant motion. From dawn to dusk, the streets were alive with activity vendors calling out their wares, carts clattering over cobblestones, and the mingled voices of countless citizens speaking Latin, Greek, and many other tongues. But beneath this lively surface lay a harsh reality few could ignore. Crowding was intense, and personal space a rarity. Apartments known as insulae were cramped and often poorly constructed, with narrow staircases and tiny rooms housing entire families. These buildings were prone to fire, a frequent and devastating threat in the densely packed city. The city's firefighting force, the vigils, was limited in manpower and equipment, often struggling to contain blazes that could consume entire neighborhoods. Fires could start from something as simple as an overturned oil lamp or a careless cooking fire. In addition to fire, the dangers of everyday life were everywhere. The narrow streets offered little refuge from thieves who exploited the chaos in crowds to steal purses or goods. Without effective policing, justice was swift and brutal when caught. Public floggings, exile, or worse. Sanitation conditions were poor. Despite Rome's advanced aqueduct system delivering clean water, waste disposal was primitive. Public latrines were common but communal and unsanitary, and open drains and rubbish in the streets contributed to the spread of disease. Disease was a constant threat. Plagues and epidemics regularly swept through Rome and its provinces. The crowded, unsanitary living conditions created ideal environments for contagions to spread rapidly. Medical knowledge was limited. Physicians used herbal remedies, bloodletting, and superstitious treatments. The idea of infection was unknown, and hygiene was often neglected. Many illnesses that are easily treatable today were fatal then. Food for the average Roman was basic. The poor relied heavily on grain, especially wheat prepared as porridge or bread. Meat was scarce and expensive. Vegetables, legumes, and occasionally fish made up most of the diet. The government sometimes distributed grain to the poor to prevent famine and social unrest, but this system was fragile and insufficient during bad harvests or political turmoil. Slavery was widespread and integral to Roman society. Slaves worked in households, farms, mines, and even skilled professions. Their lives varied widely, but were often harsh and brutal. They had no legal rights and could be punished severely for disobedience. Women, while central to family and religious life, had limited legal status. Wealthy women could exert influence behind the scenes, but most women's lives centered around marriage, childbirth, and household management. Public entertainment was a vital release. The Colosseum hosted gladiator games, wild beast hunts, and public executions that drew massive crowds. These spectacles were both entertainment and a reminder of the state's power. The Circus Maximus featured chariot races, events of high energy and danger that captivated Romans from all classes. Despite the empire's splendor, life for many was a constant battle against hardship, disease, and danger. The sun rose again over the sprawling expanse of the Roman Empire, its light casting long shadows across marble temples and bustling marketplaces. Yet for most of Rome's inhabitants, each new day was not a promise of ease or comfort, but a fresh trial to endure. The city's crowded insulae stood packed like towers of human struggle. Many families lived in tiny apartments stacked atop one another, their rooms barely large enough for beds and the barest possessions. The walls were thin and the noise constant. From dawn until late into the night, the cacophony of life pressed. Upon every resident in the narrow streets below, vendors hawked goods with fervor. The market was a riot of colors, smells, and sounds. Piles of olives glistening with oil, fragrant herbs bundled tight, vibrant fabrics fluttering in the breeze. Yet beneath this vibrancy, survival was a delicate balance. The daily task of fetching water, vital but exhausting, consumed precious time. Public fountains were crowded, forcing long waits under the unforgiving sun. Carrying heavy jugs back home was a constant chore, taxing the strength of young and old alike. Sanitation remained a grave challenge. Though Rome's aqueducts supplied fresh water, sewage flowed openly in many streets. Public latrines were communal and unsanitary, frequented by throngs with little privacy. Rats scurried beneath feet, and flies swarmed over refuse piles. Disease thrived in this environment. Illnesses that today would be quickly treated were often fatal. Dysentery, typhoid, tuberculosis, these claimed countless lives. The medical knowledge of the time was primitive. Doctors used herbs, prayers, and crude surgeries. The understanding of germs was non-existent. Infections spread unchecked. For the poor, food was simple and scarce. Grain, often turned into coarse bread or porridge, formed the staple diet. Occasionally, vegetables, beans, or fish supplemented meals. Meat was a rarity, usually reserved for festivals or the wealthy elite. The government sometimes distributed free grain to prevent unrest. But shortages were common, and famine a real threat. Slavery permeated every layer of Roman society. Millions were enslaved captives from conquered lands, born into bondage, or sold due to debt. Their lives were often brutal and without hope. They worked as laborers, artisans, servants, and even teachers, but always without freedom. Punishments for slaves and criminals were harsh and public. Flogging, branding, and execution served both to punish and to instill fear. Women's lives, while central to the family, were constrained by social expectations. Most married young, bore many children, and managed households, though some wealthy. Women wielded influence behind the scenes. Legally, they remained under male authority. Despite hardship, public entertainment flourished. Gladiator games at the Colosseum drew massive crowds. These brutal contests often ended in death, thrilling and horrifying spectators alike. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus were wild affairs, where drivers risked life and limb for glory. Theaters offered dramas that entertained and reinforced social norms. Religion was deeply woven into daily life. Romans worshipped the pantheon of gods, making sacrifices and observing rituals to secure divine favor. Omens and superstitions guided decisions. Yet beneath the grandeur and spectacle, daily life was a grind of labor, risk, and uncertainty. If a person from the modern world suddenly found themselves in ancient Rome, the shock would be profound. The comforts and protections we take for granted would vanish. The constant noise, filth, hunger, and threat of violence would wear down even the strongest. The empire's might was built on the backs of millions who endured hardship daily. It was a world where survival was never guaranteed, and where life's fragility was evident in every breath. The sun rises over the sprawling city of Rome, but the light reveals little comfort for those who call this ancient metropolis home. From the poorest corners to the grandest villas, life in the Roman Empire was a constant battle against discomfort, danger, and uncertainty. To understand why you wouldn't last a day here, we must immerse ourselves fully in the experience of living amid the empire's brilliance and brutality. The first challenge you would face is the sheer density of the population. Rome, at its peak, was home to over 1 million people, a staggering number for the ancient world. The city's layout was a maze of narrow streets, bustling markets, crowded public spaces, and towering apartment blocks called insulae. These buildings, often 6 to 7 stories tall, were constructed hastily and cheaply to accommodate the swelling populace. Inside, multiple families packed into small rooms that barely shielded them from the noise and grime outside. The constant creaks of the wooden floors, the shouted conversations of neighbors, the clanging of carts on cobblestones, and the neighing of horses were the city's soundtrack day and night. Privacy was a concept nearly unknown. You might find yourself sharing a room with your extended family or even unrelated tenants. Walls were thin, offering little protection from the coughing, arguing, or late-night celebrations next door. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by interruptions from street vendors, drunken revelers, or sudden emergencies. Water, so essential to survival, posed another hurdle. Although Rome's aqueducts were engineering marvels, delivering fresh water across miles, only the wealthy had plumbing in their homes. The majority relied on public fountains and wells, where long lines formed daily. Imagine hauling heavy clay or bronze jugs through crowded streets, balancing them carefully on your head, all while dodging horses, pedestrians, and vendors. Sanitation was a pervasive nightmare. Waste disposal was rudimentary at best. The city's streets often doubled as open sewers, with refuse, animal droppings, and human waste flowing through gutters or dumped directly outside homes. Public latrines were communal and lacked any privacy. Sitting side by side on stone benches with holes, Romans relieved themselves while gossiping or conducting business. The stench was overwhelming, especially in summer heat, attracting swarms of flies and rats. Disease spread swiftly in such conditions. Epidemics of dysentery, malaria, typhoid, and smallpox were common, decimating neighborhoods without mercy. Medical care was primitive. Physicians relied on herbs, potions, and rituals, with little understanding of infection or hygiene. Many illnesses were untreatable, and mortality rates were high, especially for infants and the elderly. Food scarcity was a constant threat. Though Rome controlled vast territories supplying grain, olive oil, wine, and other staples, distribution was uneven. Bad harvests, piracy, or civil unrest could disrupt supply chains, leading to famine and riots. The government tried to maintain order by subsidizing grain, offering free or low-cost bread to the poor. Yet even this lifeline was fragile. For the lower classes, diets consisted mostly of porridge made from barley or wheat, supplemented by beans, vegetables, and occasionally fish or meat. The wealthy feasted on extravagant meals, dormice stuffed with nuts, peacock, oysters, and exotic spices, but such luxuries were rare and inaccessible to most. Slavery was an institution, embedded in every corner of society. Millions of slaves labored in households, farms, mines, and workshops. Their treatment varied from relative kindness to brutal cruelty. Punishments were harsh, and freedom was a distant hope for most. Families were frequently torn apart, and slaves had no legal rights or protections. Women's lives, though central to family and religious duties, were restricted by law and custom. Marriage was often arranged for political or economic gain. Women managed households, bore children, and sometimes influenced society indirectly. Yet their public roles were limited, and they remained under male authority. Despite such adversity, Romans found moments of escape and community. Public baths were centers for hygiene, exercise, and socializing. Festivals honored gods with ceremonies, games, and feasts, temporarily lifting the burdens of daily life. The Colosseum's gladiator fights and the Circus Maximus chariot races offered thrilling diversions, though steeped in violence. Political intrigue and power struggles permeated elite circles. Assassinations, betrayals, and shifting alliances created an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. For the average citizen, this world of opulence and danger was distant yet impactful. Shaping laws, taxes, and social order. Travel was arduous. and perilous. Roads connected the empire, but journeys took weeks or months by foot or horse, through forests, mountains, and deserts. Bandits, wild animals, and harsh weather posed constant risks. Inns were often crowded and unsanitary. Taxes were heavy and relentless, funding armies, infrastructure, and the lavish lifestyles of the elite. Failure to pay could mean property seizure, imprisonment, or worse. The Roman military was a dominant force, but exacted a heavy toll. Soldiers endured grueling training, strict discipline, and deadly battles. Many never returned home. Military service offered a chance at social advancement, but demanded sacrifices few could bear. At night, the city never truly slept. Lamps flickered in windows and streets. Caverns buzzed with conversation and drink. Some sought refuge in music and dance, others in prayer and solitude. Yet many faced long nights filled with hunger, fear, or sickness. For a modern person thrust into this world without warning, the experience would be overwhelming. The absence of modern conveniences, the ever-present dangers, and the harshness of daily existence would challenge body and spirit alike. Survival required toughness, resilience, and often luck. The empire's grandeur masked the relentless struggles beneath. To last even a single day here was an achievement few could claim without sacrifice. The dawn in ancient Rome was never quiet. As the first pale light crept over the rooftops, the city already stirred with life, an endless river of people pouring into the streets. Vendors arranged their stalls, shouting out the day's goods: fresh bread, olives glistening in oil, bundles of herbs, fish caught from the nearby Tiber River. Horses clattered on uneven cobblestones, and the cries of street children echoed from the alleyways. The scent of wood smoke, mixed with the less pleasant odors of waste and unwashed crowds, hung thick in the air. If you woke here without warning, the sheer volume of noise and activity would overwhelm you immediately. The tight quarters of the insulae offered no sanctuary from the chaos. These tall, rickety apartment blocks were home to hundreds, their walls thin enough that conversations and quarrels drifted freely between rooms. Floors creaked under the weight of hundreds of footsteps, and the smell of damp stone and stale air seeped into every crevice. You'd find yourself sharing a cramped space with family, parents, siblings, perhaps grandparents, and sometimes with lodgers or strangers. Privacy, as understood in the modern world, was non-existent. The space was so confined that you might sleep barely inches from your neighbor's bed. The chatter, coughing, and nighttime noises would blur into a constant background hum, a reminder that solitude was a rare and precious luxury. Your morning routine would begin early, not because you wanted it to, but because life in Rome demanded it. Without electricity, you rose with the sun, or sometimes before. The air could be chill in winter or already heavy with heat in summer. There was no soft mattress or warm duvet, only hard stone or packed earth beneath you, and coarse woolen blankets if you were lucky. Before you could think of breakfast, you'd have to fetch water, despite the marvel of Rome's aqueducts delivering fresh water to the city. Access was communal. The fountains, often a fair walk from your home, were crowded with neighbors, waiting their turn to fill heavy jugs. Carrying the water back required balance and strength as the weight pressed down on your head or shoulder. The sun beat down mercilessly in summer, and rain or cold made the task even harder. Cooking was done over open flames, often in cramped communal spaces. The smell of smoke and burning wood filled the air. Firewood was expensive and had to be used sparingly. Many families ate simple meals: thick bread dipped in olive oil, perhaps some cheese or dried fruit. Meat was a rarity, mostly reserved for the wealthy or special occasions. Vegetables, beans, and pulses made up the bulk of the diet for most. Sanitation was a constant challenge. Waste disposal was primitive. Garbage piled up in alleys, and human waste was often thrown into the streets or into open drains. Public latrines, where they existed, were communal and poorly maintained. The stench was overwhelming, especially in summer months. Rats and flies thrived in this environment, spreading disease with little resistance. Disease was a constant threat. The knowledge of medicine was limited, and the causes of illness were poorly understood. Physicians used herbal remedies, bloodletting, and incantations with limited success. Epidemics swept through the city regularly, killing thousands. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, malaria, and smallpox were common killers. Infant mortality was high, and life expectancy hovered around the mid-30s. The social divide was stark. While the elites lived in sprawling villas with running water, gardens, and slaves to attend their every need, the majority of Romans were poor laborers, craftsmen, or traders. Slavery was widespread, with millions enslaved throughout the empire. Slaves worked in homes, farms, mines, and even served as teachers or doctors in some cases. They had no legal rights and were subject to harsh punishment. Women's roles were primarily domestic, centered on child-rearing and household management. Their legal status was limited, often under the authority of their father or husband. Wealthy women could exert influence through family connections, but public life was largely closed to them. The city was not only noisy, but dangerous. Pickpockets and thieves operated openly, preying on the crowded streets. Law enforcement was minimal and just as harsh. Punishments for crimes ranged from flogging and branding to execution, often carried out publicly as a deterrent. The Colosseum and Circus Maximus were centers of public life, offering brutal entertainment. Gladiatorial games, animal hunts, and chariot races were popular, but also reminders of the empire's violence and inequality. Trade connected Rome to the far reaches of the known world, bringing goods and ideas from Asia, Africa, and Europe. Yet the empire was always on edge. Wars, rebellions, and political intrigue simmered beneath the surface. Shaping the lives of all. Travel was difficult and dangerous. Roads were rough, inns crowded and unsanitary. Bandits and wild animals posed risks along the way. Taxation was heavy, supporting the military and public works. Failure to pay could result in imprisonment or loss of property. The Roman army was a formidable force, but exacted a high price. Soldiers endured harsh discipline, brutal training, and deadly combat. Many died far from home. At night, the city never truly slept. Lanterns flickered in windows and on streets. Taverns and bathhouses remained open, filled with conversation, music, and drink. For a person from today, accustomed to comfort and safety, the reality of life in ancient Rome would be overwhelming. Every day was a test of endurance, resilience, and luck. Surviving one day was an achievement. Lasting longer required strength few possessed. As the dawn breaks over the vast city of Rome, a new day begins for millions of inhabitants, each grappling with the relentless challenges that define life in the ancient empire. The first light cast long shadows over marble temples, bustling marketplaces, and the tightly packed insulae, where countless families live in cramped quarters with barely enough space to breathe. To understand why a modern person would struggle to survive even a day here, one must step fully into the experience of the city and its people. The very architecture of Rome tells a story of necessity and strain. The insulae towering apartment buildings were built quickly and without much concern for safety, often stretching 6 or 7 stories high. These structures were prone to collapse or devastating fires, and overcrowding was the norm rather than the exception. Inside, families shared tiny rooms that offered little privacy or comfort. Walls were paper thin, carrying the sounds of neighbors' conversations, disputes, and daily activities. Nights were restless, with noise from the streets and within, the building echoing endlessly. Waking in such conditions was jarring. There were no modern conveniences like heating or insulation, and the cold stone floors or wooden platforms served as beds. Many slept on mats or rough wool blankets, huddled, close for warmth. The mornings brought little relief. The air was often damp or cold, especially in winter months. The first task of the day, for most residents, was to secure fresh water, a vital but exhausting chore. Despite Rome's remarkable aqueduct system, water was a shared resource. Public. Fountains and wells were crowded, and waiting your turn could take a significant portion of the morning. Carrying heavy clay or bronze jugs through bustling streets, balancing them atop the head or on the hip, was physically demanding work. Sun's heat in summer, or the chill of winter rain, made the journey even more difficult. Once water was secured, families turned to preparing their meals. Cooking took place over open fires or in communal ovens, with firewood being a precious and sometimes scarce commodity. The smell of burning wood mixed with smoke filled the air, often seeping into the walls and belongings of the residents. Meals were simple and utilitarian thick, coarse bread, often dipped in olive oil, with occasional additions like cheese, olives, or dried fruits. Meat was an infrequent luxury, generally reserved for the wealthy or special occasions. Beans, lentils, and vegetables made up the majority of the diet for the poorer citizens. Sanitation, or the lack thereof, was a dire concern. Waste disposal. Systems were primitive. Streets often doubled as open sewers, carrying refuse and human waste away from homes and public spaces. Public latrines, communal and unsanitary, were common but uncomfortable and provided little privacy. The combination of filth, overcrowding, and stagnant water created perfect breeding grounds for disease. Rats scurried beneath feet, and flies buzzed relentlessly. Disease ravaged Rome repeatedly. Epidemics of dysentery, malaria, typhoid, and smallpox were frequent and deadly. Medical knowledge was rudimentary and often mixed with superstition. Physicians used herbal remedies, bloodletting, and incantations, but the causes of infections were poorly understood. The concept of germs did not exist, and hygiene was often neglected. Infant mortality was extremely high, and average life expectancy was shockingly low by modern standards. Social divisions in Rome were stark and rigid. At the pinnacle were senators, wealthy landowners, and powerful merchants. Below them were artisans, laborers, freedmen, and slaves. Slavery was deeply woven into the fabric of Roman life. Millions of individuals were enslaved, working in households, farms, mines, and workshops. Their conditions ranged from relatively comfortable to unimaginably brutal. Slaves had no legal rights and could be subjected to cruel punishment at their owner's whim. Families were frequently separated, and the threat of physical abuse loomed constantly. Women, while central to family and religious life, were often limited in their legal rights and societal roles. Marriage and childbearing were primary expectations. Wealthy women could exert influence indirectly through family connections, but most women were confined to domestic duties and had little public power. The dangers of everyday life extended beyond living conditions. The streets were rife with crime. Pickpockets, thieves, and conmen exploited the crowds and confusion. Law enforcement was minimal and often ineffective. Punishments for crimes could be severe and public, ranging from flogging and branding to exile or death. The Roman justice system was swift and brutal, serving as both punishment and spectacle. Entertainment provided some relief from the harsh realities. The Colosseum was a monumental arena where gladiators fought for glory and survival, often to the death. These brutal contests captivated the populace, combining violence with pageantry. The Circus Maximus hosted chariot races that were equally thrilling and perilous, drawing crowds of tens of thousands. Theaters presented dramas that explored human emotions and societal values. These spectacles were both social events and tools of political control. Religion was integral to Roman life. A vast pantheon of gods and spirits guided daily rituals and public ceremonies. Temples dotted the cityscape, and festivals celebrated the divine with sacrifices, processions, and feasts. Omens and superstitions influenced decisions both large and small. The favor of the gods was believed essential for success, protection, and prosperity. Political life in Rome was fraught with tension. Power struggles, assassinations, and betrayals were common in the corridors of influence. The emperor's favor could make or break careers and lives. For ordinary citizens, these machinations often meant instability and uncertainty. Travel within the empire was difficult and perilous. Though Roman roads were engineering marvels, journeys took days or weeks. Inns were often overcrowded and unsanitary. Bandits and wild animals posed constant threats. Merchants and soldiers alike faced hardships on the road. Taxes were heavy and incessant. They funded the sprawling bureaucracy, public works, and the legions that protected the empire's borders. Failure to pay taxes could lead to property seizure or imprisonment. For many, paying the taxes consumed most of their income. The Roman military was formidable, but exacted a heavy toll on soldiers. Training was grueling, discipline strict, and combat deadly. Many soldiers never returned home. For some, military service was a path to social advancement, but it came with great sacrifice. As night fell, the city did not truly rest. Lanterns flickered in windows and streets. Taverns and bathhouses remained lively, filled with conversation, music, and drink. But many faced long, cold nights, haunted by hunger, illness, or fear. For a modern person abruptly placed in this ancient world, the shock would be overwhelming. The comforts of today, clean water, sanitation, medical care, personal security, would be absent. The daily grind of survival, the constant exposure to danger and discomfort, would quickly erode physical and mental strength. Surviving even a single day in the Roman Empire required resilience, toughness, and often luck. It was a world where life's fragility was palpable, and where the empire's grandeur stood in stark contrast to the harsh realities of its people. The early morning light filtered weakly through the grime-coated windows of your cramped Roman insula apartment, casting a dull glow over the rough stone walls and worn wooden furnishings. The air was thick with the mingled scents of smoke, sweat, and unwashed bodies, a stark reminder of the hardships that filled every breath in this sprawling ancient city. Though the sun promised warmth, the chill that lingered in your cramped room seemed to cling stubbornly to your skin, as if resisting the new day's arrival. You roused from a restless sleep, having been stirred repeatedly by the sounds of voices, carts rattling over the cobblestones, and the occasional shout or bark echoing down the narrow streets below. The thinness of the walls leaves little refuge from the cacophony neighbors. Moving about, children crying, the scrape of a broom across the stone floor. Privacy is a luxury long forgotten here, replaced by the constant, close presence of others. Rising slowly, you swing your legs off the edge of your hard pallet lightly. Just a rough mattress stuffed with straw, and set your bare feet onto the cold, uneven floor. The chill bites into your skin, a sharp reminder that comfort is rare and fleeting in this world. You dress hastily, the coarse fabric of your tunic rough against your skin. Outside, the city is already alive, bustling with movement and noise. As it prepares for the demands of the day, the first task beckons: water. Despite the marvels of Rome's aqueducts, you do not have the luxury of indoor plumbing. Instead, you must join the throng gathering at the public fountain, a large stone basin where clear water spills continuously, fed from miles away by channels carefully maintained by engineers. Here your neighbors line up, clay jars balanced precariously atop their heads, or carried firmly in their hands, waiting their turn. The journey to the fountain is fraught with challenges. The narrow streets are crowded, and you must weave carefully through vendors shouting their wares, animals tethered near their owners, and carts laden with goods bumping over worn cobbles. The sun climbs higher, beating down fiercely and already, making the air oppressive. Balancing the heavy vessel on your head, you steady your steps and begin the slow trek back home, knowing you will repeat this chore several times a day. Back in your tiny room, you pour water into a basin, then begin preparations for the morning meal. Cooking is done over a small open flame, fueled by precious firewood that must be used sparingly. The smoke curls upward, adding to the haze that already hangs heavy in the air. Breakfast is modest, a coarse, dense bread baked in communal ovens, dipped into a small dish of olive oil. For many, this meal is all that sustains them until mid-afternoon. Outside, the city unfolds in full, a riot of sights, sounds, and smells. The markets are vibrant, alive with merchants from across the empire, shouting the virtues of their goods. Spices from India, fine silks from the East, grains from the fertile fields of Egypt, and wines from the vineyards of Gaul mingle in the stalls. Yet for most of Rome's inhabitants, these treasures are unattainable luxuries, tokens of a world beyond reach. Your daily labor awaits. Perhaps you are a craftsman, shaping clay into pottery or hammering iron into tools, or a laborer, hauling stones for construction, or working as a porter in the docks where ships unload their cargo. Each task is exhausting, the sun relentless, and the work dangerous. Injuries are common, and medical help scarce. Throughout the city, the dangers of everyday life are constant. Fires ravage neighborhoods with frightening frequency. The closely packed insulae, built hastily with flammable materials, offer little resistance to flames. The vigils, Rome's firefighting force, patrol the streets with primitive equipment, but are often overwhelmed. Entire blocks can burn in hours, leaving families homeless and destitute. Sanitation problems compound these hazards. Waste disposal is primitive, with refuse dumped into the streets or open drains. The Tiber River, flowing sluggishly through the city, carries much of this filth. The smell is pervasive, especially during the heat of summer, drawing swarms of flies and attracting vermin. Rats, numerous and bold, scurry through the alleys, spreading disease. Disease stalks the population relentlessly. Plagues and epidemics sweep through densely packed districts, leaving death in their wake. Without knowledge of germs or effective treatments, medical practitioners rely on herbal remedies, prayers, and rituals. Many diseases that are minor inconveniences today were fatal then. Child mortality is devastatingly high, and few survive into old age. Despite the crushing hardships, social life pulses vibrantly. Public baths offer respite and a place to socialize. Though crowded and noisy, these baths are essential for hygiene, relaxation, and networking. Men and women frequent separate facilities or visit at different times, engaging in exercise, bathing, and sometimes business discussions. Religion weaves through daily routines. Romans honor a pantheon of gods and spirits, believing their favor, essential for success and protection. Temples stand grand and imposing, and public festivals celebrate the divine with sacrifices, processions, and theatrical performances. Omens and auguries shape decisions, from political appointments to personal matters. Slavery is omnipresent. Millions are enslaved captives from conquest, debtors, or children born into bondage. Slaves toil in households, workshops, farms, and mines. Their lives range from relative comfort to harsh brutality. They have no legal rights and face severe punishments. Families are often broken apart by sales and transfers. Women navigate a world of limited autonomy. Their roles focus on managing households, bearing children, and maintaining family honor. Though legally subordinate, Women influence family dynamics and sometimes wield power through social connections. The Roman military dominates the empire's life. Soldiers endure grueling training, harsh discipline, and constant danger. Military campaigns extend Rome's borders, but bring death and destruction. Many never see their families again. Taxes weigh heavily on the populace, funding armies, infrastructure, and government. Failure to pay leads to harsh consequences. The economy depends on constant production and tribute, but wealth is unevenly distributed. Entertainment offers both relief and spectacle. Gladiatorial combats, chariot races, and theatrical performances captivate the populace, masking social tensions and reminding all of the empire's might. At night, Rome's alive with lanterns, taverns, and whispers. Yet beneath the surface lie fears of violence, poverty, disease. Sleep comes fitfully amid noise and worry. For a person from today, the world of ancient Rome is a relentless trial. The absence of modern comforts, the dangers at every turn, and the harshness of daily life would erode body and spirit swiftly. Surviving a single day. Here is a feat few could achieve without resilience, strength, and a measure of fortune. The dawn in the city of Rome was anything but peaceful. The first light crept through the narrow windows of insulae, illuminating the cramped spaces where countless souls slept, barely shielded from the hardships that awaited them each day. The air was thick with the mingling sense of smoke from cooking fires, the pungent odors of unwashed bodies, and the ever-present stench of refuse from the overflowing gutters and open sewers that crisscrossed the city streets. This was the reality of life in the heart of the empire, a city that dazzled with its grandeur, but oppressed with its relentlessness. Waking from a night's restless slumber, the inhabitants of Rome faced immediate challenges. Unlike today's world of warmth and comfort, many rose on cold stone or packed earth floors, wrapped in coarse wool blankets that offered little protection against the chill. The thin walls of their dwellings did little to block the sounds of neighbors stirring, arguing, or tending to their own morning rituals. Privacy was a concept foreign to most. Life was lived in close proximity, every breath shared with those around. The task of obtaining fresh water was both a necessity and a burden. Though the city's aqueducts were marvels of engineering, delivering thousands of gallons of water daily from distant springs, access was communal. Public fountains and wells served as gathering points for the populace, where the able-bodied queued patiently, balancing heavy clay jugs atop their heads, or gripping them tightly in calloused hands. The journey to and from these sources was fraught with obstacles, narrow, crowded streets filled with merchants' animals, and the cacophony of a city alive in its ceaseless bustle. The sun's harsh glare and the weight of the water taxed even the strongest. Cooking was a laborious process carried out over open flames or in shared ovens. Firewood was precious, and conserving it was critical, often necessitating simple meals. Cooked quickly, breakfasts were sparse. Coarse bread often dipped in olive oil, accompanied occasionally by olives or dried fruit. Meat was a rare indulgence, affordable only by the wealthy or reserved for celebrations. The diet of the common citizen relied heavily on grains, legumes, and whatever vegetables could be grown or procured cheaply. Sanitation posed a dire threat to health and well-being. Waste disposal systems were inadequate, with refuse and human waste frequently discarded into the streets or the Tiber River, which doubled as the city's sewer. Public latrines were communal, unsanitary, and offered little in the way of privacy or comfort. The filth attracted vermin rats that scurried openly and swarmed in numbers, spreading disease with little resistance. Flies buzzed incessantly, drawn to open waste and decay. Disease was a grim constant in Roman life. Epidemics swept through densely populated neighborhoods with devastating speed, claiming thousands in their wake. Dysentery, typhoid, malaria, and smallpox were common killers. Medical knowledge was rudimentary and often entwined with superstition. Physicians employed herbal remedies, bloodletting, and rituals to combat illnesses, but these treatments were of limited efficacy. The concept of contagion was unknown, and hygiene was poorly practiced. Infant mortality rates were high, and few survived past their 30s. Social stratification was stark and unyielding. At the apex stood the senatorial and equestrian classes, wealthy landowners, merchants, and politicians who wielded power and influence. Below them were the plebeians, artisans, laborers, traders, and at the bottom, slaves, numbering in this millions. Slavery was an institution deeply embedded in Roman society. Enslaved individuals worked in every facet of urban and rural life, from household servants to mine workers, from skilled artisans to field hands. Their treatment varied widely, but was often harsh and unforgiving. They lacked legal rights and faced brutal punishment. Families were frequently torn apart, sold piecemeal to distant owners. Women, while pivotal in family and religious life, were constrained by societal norms and legal limitations. Their primary roles centered on managing households, bearing and raising children, and upholding family honor. While some affluent women exerted influence through familial connections, public life and legal autonomy remained largely inaccessible. The dangers of daily existence extended beyond living conditions. Crime was endemic. Pickpockets, thieves, and swindlers exploited the crowded markets and narrow streets. Law enforcement was limited, and punishments were severe and public. Justice often involved flogging, branding, exile, or execution, all conducted in view of the populace as a deterrent. Public entertainment provided a temporary escape from hardship. The Colosseum stood as a testament to Rome's grandeur and brutality. Gladiatorial games, wild beast hunts, and public executions drew tens of thousands of spectators. The spectacle was both a display of martial valor and a grim reminder of the state's power. The Circus Maximus hosted chariot races that were wildly popular, often inciting fierce rivalries and even violence among fans. Theaters offered dramatic performances that reinforced social values and entertained the masses. Religion permeated every aspect of Roman life. A pantheon of gods and goddesses were honored through rituals, sacrifices, and festivals. Omens, auguries, and superstitions guided decisions at every level, from the political to the personal. Temples adorned the cityscape, and priests held significant sway. Political life was a treacherous arena. Power struggles, conspiracies, and assassinations were common in the imperial courts and senatorial chambers. The fate of citizens often hinged on the whims of emperors or powerful families. For many, political unrest translated into economic hardship or violence that traveled across the empire. Though facilitated by extensive road networks, was arduous and dangerous. Journeys took weeks or months, exposing travelers to bandits, wild animals, and harsh weather. Inns were often overcrowded, dirty, and unsafe. Merchants and soldiers alike faced these perils regularly. Taxes were a relentless burden. To fund the empire's vast military and infrastructure, citizens and provinces paid heavy tributes. Failure to meet tax demands could result in seizure of property, imprisonment, or worse. The economic strain weighed heavily on the lower classes. The Roman army, while a formidable force, exacted a heavy toll on its soldiers. Training was brutal, discipline harsh, and the threat of combat omnipresent. Many perished far from home. Military service, though offering prospects for advancement, demanded sacrifices that few could endure. As night descended, the city remained vibrant. Lanterns flickered in windows and along streets. Taverns and bathhouses buzzed with conversation, music, and drink. Yet many faced long nights marked by hunger, illness, or anxiety. Sleep was often restless, disturbed by the din of the city or the gnawing of worry. For a modern individual suddenly thrust into this ancient world, the shock would be profound. The absence of sanitation, healthcare, security, and comfort would quickly erode physical and mental resilience. The relentless challenges of daily life would test endurance beyond anything imaginable. The morning sun rose over the sprawling cityscape of ancient Rome, illuminating the jagged skyline of temples, markets, and towering insulae that housed millions of souls. But for most inhabitants, the brilliance of marble and the grandeur of imperial power were distant spectacles, barely touching the grueling realities of everyday life. To step into this world without preparation was to confront hardship on a scale few today could fathom. From the moment you opened your eyes in the cramped quarters of a typical Roman insula, discomfort was immediate. These apartment buildings, often hastily constructed with wood and cheap brick, were notoriously unsafe. Fires ravaged neighborhoods regularly, fueled by open flames used for cooking and heating. Collapse was always a threat. Many insulae were structurally unsound, with narrow staircases that could barely accommodate the rush of residents during an emergency. Within your tiny room, shared with family members or even strangers, the thin walls did little to muffle the sounds of daily life. The coughing of a sick child, the hushed whispers of neighbors, the creak of wooden beams bearing heavy loads above. The stench of dampness, sweat, and unwashed bodies hung in the stale air, a constant reminder of the lack of sanitation and fresh ventilation. Waking here meant immediately facing the realities of scarcity. Water was a precious resource, despite Rome's famed aqueducts. Most citizens fetched water from public fountains, a task requiring stamina and patience as you navigated crowded streets carrying heavy clay vessels. The heat of summer or chill of winter made this chore even more arduous, and the risk of theft or accident was ever present. Breakfast was a modest affair, perhaps a piece of dense bread dipped in olive oil, accompanied by olives or a bit of cheese if you were fortunate. Food was rationed carefully. Meat was rare and reserved for the wealthy or special occasions. The poor subsisted largely on grains, beans, vegetables, and whatever small fish could be procured from the Tiber. Sanitation. Woes compounded the struggle. Waste disposal systems were rudimentary. Garbage and human refuse were often discarded into the streets or flowing open drains. Public latrines were communal and unhygienic, offering little privacy or comfort. The combination of filth, overcrowding, and stagnant water created a breeding ground for disease. Plagues were frequent and devastating. Without understanding of contagion, medical practitioners relied on superstition, herbal remedies, and prayer. Many illnesses we consider minor today were often fatal. Infant mortality was crushingly high, and the average lifespan was short. Even by ancient standards, social hierarchy was sharply defined and rigid. The wealthy lived in spacious homes with running water, gardens, and servants, but the vast majority of Romans were plebeians, artisans, laborers, and merchants struggling to make ends meet. Slavery was pervasive, with millions enslaved throughout the empire. Their lives ranged from harsh servitude to skilled labor, but always lacked freedom or security. Women, while central to family and religious life, had limited legal rights. Their primary roles revolved around managing the household and raising children. Although some affluent women wielded influence behind the scenes, their public and legal agency was constrained. Danger lurked everywhere. Crime was rampant. Pickpockets and thieves exploited the crowded markets and alleyways. Law enforcement was insufficient, and punishments for crimes were severe and often public, including flogging, branding, or execution. The justice system was swift but brutal, reflecting the empire's harsh values. Public entertainment provided a necessary outlet. The Colosseum hosted gladiatorial games and were simultaneously brutal and captivating. Chariot races at the circus. Maximus drew vast, passionate crowds. Theaters staged dramas reinforcing social and political ideals. These spectacles, while distracting, underscored the empire's violent and unequal nature. Religion permeated daily existence. Romans worshipped a multitude of gods, observing rituals and festivals with great fervor. Temples adorned the city, and priests held important societal roles. Superstition influenced decisions, and divine favor was sought in all matters. Political intrigue and unrest simmered beneath the surface. Power struggles, assassinations, and conspiracies were commonplace. In imperial and senatorial circles, the impact of these machinations often rippled down to the populace in the form of taxation, unrest, or violence. Travel was difficult and hazardous. Roads connected the empire's vast territories, but journeys were long, uncomfortable, and fraught with risk. Inns offered little in the way of hygiene or safety. Bandits and wild animals posed constant threats. Taxes were heavy and relentless, supporting Rome's armies and infrastructure. Failure to pay could mean imprisonment or confiscation. The economy depended heavily on constant production and tribute, but wealth was unevenly distributed. The military was a cornerstone of Roman power, but service demanded sacrifice. Soldiers endured brutal training and combat, often far from home. Many never returned. As night fell, the city's lights flickered, on lamps in windows and along streets. Taverns and bathhouses remained lively, filled with voices and music. Yet beneath this vibrancy, many faced sleepless nights filled with hunger, illness, or fear. For someone from today, thrust unprepared into this world, survival would be an immense challenge. The absence of modern comforts, combined with relentless hardships and dangers, would erode body and spirit swiftly. To last even a day in ancient Rome was a testament to human resilience, toughness, and often fortune. The empire's grandeur masked the relentless trials faced by its people, a world where the price of living was steep and survival never guaranteed. The first light of dawn crept over the ancient city of Rome, casting a pale glow on its sprawling streets and monumental structures. For the millions who lived within its walls, this was not a time for rest, but the beginning of yet another arduous day. The city's grandeur, visible in its marble temples, triumphal arches, and bustling forums, stood in stark contrast to the harshness of daily life faced by its inhabitants. You awaken in the cramped, dimly lit room of a typical Roman insula, an apartment building often several stories high, packed with families living in spaces barely large enough for their needs. The walls are thin, the air stale and heavy with the mingled odors of sweat, smoke, and unwashed bodies. Your bed is nothing more than a thin mattress stuffed with straw, laid upon a rough wooden platform. The chill of the stone floor seeps into your bones, a reminder that warmth and comfort are luxuries beyond reach. Outside your window, the city is already stirring. Vendors set up their stalls in the marketplace, shouting to attract customers. The sound of carts rolling over uneven cobblestones, the chatter of passers-by, and the occasional bray of a donkey create a cacophony that penetrates even the thickest walls. Privacy is a distant memory in this bustling metropolis. Your first task of the day is to secure fresh water, a precious commodity, despite the city's sophisticated aqueduct system. The public fountains, fed by miles of aqueducts, serve as gathering points for the populace. You join the queue of people carrying clay or bronze jugs, waiting patiently as others fill their vessels. The journey to and from the fountain is laborious, requiring balance and strength to navigate the crowded streets without spilling the precious cargo. Back in your humble abode, you prepare a simple breakfast, usually consisting of coarse bread dipped in olive oil, perhaps accompanied by olives. or dried fruit if fortune allows. Meat is a rarity, a luxury reserved for the wealthy or special occasions. The majority of your diet comprises grains, legumes, and whatever vegetables can be procured. Sanitation presents a constant challenge. Waste disposal systems are rudimentary. Refuse and human waste are often dumped into streets or open drains. Public latrines, communal and poorly maintained, provide little comfort or privacy. The pervasive filth attracts vermin rats, and flies abound, spreading disease throughout the densely populated neighborhoods. Illness is a constant threat. Epidemics of dysentery, malaria, typhoid, and smallpox sweep through the city regularly, claiming countless lives. Medical knowledge is limited and often entangled with superstition. Treatments involve herbal concoctions, bloodletting, and prayers. The concept of contagion is unknown, and hygiene practices are insufficient. Infant mortality rates are devastatingly high, and average life expectancy hovers around 35 years. Society is rigidly stratified. The elite, including senators and wealthy merchants, live in spacious villas with running water, gardens, and servants. The plebeians, artisans, laborers, traders reside in cramped quarters, struggling to survive. Slavery is pervasive. Millions are enslaved across the empire, performing tasks ranging from domestic service to hard labor in mines and fields. Slavs have no legal rights and endure harsh punishments. Women, while central to family and religious life, face significant social and legal limitations. Their roles primarily involve managing households and bearing children. Some affluent women wield influence behind the scenes, but public life and legal authority remain male domains. The city is rife with danger. Crime is widespread, with pickpockets and thieves exploiting the crowded streets. Law enforcement is limited, and punishments for crime are severe and public. Justice often involves flogging, branding, exile, or execution, serving as deterrence. To others, public entertainment offers temporary respite. The Colosseum hosts gladiatorial combats, wild beast hunts, and public executions, thrilling and horrifying spectators alike. The Circus Maximus draws massive crowds for chariot races. Theaters stage dramas that reflect social values and entertain the masses. Religion permeates all aspects of life. A vast pantheon of gods and spirits is worshipped through rituals, sacrifices, and festivals. Omens and superstitions guide decisions from personal matters to politics. Temples and priests hold significant social influence. Political life is fraught with intrigue and violence. Power struggles, assassinations, and conspiracies are common within imperial and senatorial circles. The consequences of these conflicts often ripple down to the populace, resulting in economic hardship or unrest. Travel within the empire is arduous and dangerous. Though connected by extensive roads, journeys are long and fraught with risks from bandits, wild animals, and harsh weather. Inns are often overcrowded and unsanitary. Taxes are heavy and relentless, funding the empire's armies and infrastructure. Failure to pay results in harsh penalties. The economy depends heavily on continuous production and tribute, but wealth is concentrated among the elite. The military is the empire's backbone, but demands great sacrifice. Soldiers undergo brutal training and face deadly combat. Many perish far from home. Military service offers prospects for advancement, but exacts a heavy toll. As night falls, Rome remains vibrant. Lanterns flickering windows and streets. Taverns and bathhouses buzz with activity. Yet many face nights marked by hunger, sickness, or fear. Sleep is often fitful and interrupted. For a modern person thrust into this world, the challenges would be overwhelming. The absence of modern sanitation, healthcare, security, and comfort would quickly erode physical and mental resilience. Daily, Life is a relentless struggle where survival requires strength, endurance, and luck. The first light of dawn barely filtered through the narrow windows of your cramped Roman insula, casting faint shadows over the rough walls that enclosed your modest quarters. The air was thick with the mingling sense of smoke from cooking fires, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present stench of refuse accumulating in the streets below. Each breath reminded you of the harshness woven into every aspect of life within. The sprawling empire. Despite the grandeur that Rome displayed to the world, the daily existence of its millions was marked by relentless hardship and ceaseless struggle. As you slowly rouse from a restless sleep, the cacophony of the cities. Awakening seeps through the thin walls, merchants shouting their wares in the marketplace, carts clattering over cobblestones, children laughing and crying, and the distant murmur of religious chants from nearby temples. Privacy is a luxury here, absent amid the crowded quarters and constant bustle. You share your room with family members, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of the lack of space and quiet. Your first task is the retrieval of water, an endeavor both vital and exhausting. Although Rome boasts magnificent aqueducts that transport fresh water from distant springs, access is communal, often involving long queues at public fountains. The heavy clay or bronze jug you carry demands careful balance and endurance as you navigate narrow, crowded streets, dodging livestock, vendors, and fellow citizens similarly burdened. The sun's heat already begins to press down upon the city, making this daily chore all the more taxing. Back in your modest dwelling, you begin preparing the day's first meal. Cooking is performed over an open flame, fueled by precious firewood, the smoke curling upward, mixing with the haze that pervades the city. Your breakfast is simple: coarse bread soaked in olive oil, supplemented occasionally by olives or dried fruit. Meat is a rarity for the common folk, reserved mainly for the wealthy or special occasions. The bulk of your diet consists of grains, legumes, and seasonal vegetables, sustained by whatever you can afford or barter. The streets outside pulse with life. Markets teem with goods from every corner of the empire: spices from India, silks from the East, grains from Egypt, and wines from Gaul, all offered amidst a sea of humanity. Yet for the average Roman, such luxuries are distant dreams, symbols of wealth beyond reach. Labor consumes your day, whether as a craftsman shaping clay or iron, a laborer unloading goods at the docks, or a porter hauling heavy loads. Your body endures relentless strain. Injuries are common and medical aid scarce. Physicians rely on rudimentary herbal remedies, bloodletting, and prayers, their understanding limited and often intertwined with superstition. Disease runs rampant, facilitated by overcrowding and poor hygiene, claiming countless lives annually. The city's sanitation is a dire problem. Waste is frequently discarded into the streets or open gutters, and public latrines are communal and unsanitary, providing little privacy or relief from the pervasive filth. Rats and flies thrive, vectors of disease and misery. Epidemics: dysentery, typhoid, malaria regularly sweep through neighborhoods, devastating families and communities. That social stratification shapes every interaction. The wealthy enjoy spacious homes with running water, baths, and servants, while the majority endure cramped, unsafe conditions. Slavery underpins the economy and society. Millions are enslaved, serving in households, workshops, mines, and fields, often subjected to harsh treatment and devoid of rights. Women's roles are primarily domestic, centered on managing households and raising children. While some wealthy women exert influence behind the scenes, legal and societal restrictions limit their public agency. Marriage, family honor, and fertility dominate their lives. Crime and violence are commonplace. Pickpockets and thieves prey on crowded streets. Law enforcement is limited, and justice harsh and public, with punishments ranging from flogging to execution. Gladiatorial games, public executions, and chariot races serve as brutal entertainment, but also as reminders of the empire's power and societal order. Religion is woven into daily life, with a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses worshipped through rituals, sacrifices, and festivals. Omens and auguries guide personal and political decisions. Temples and priests wield significant influence. Political intrigue permeates the empire, with power struggles, conspiracies, and violence commonplace among elites. These conflicts often ripple outward, affecting the lives of ordinary citizens. Through unrest, taxation, or war. Travel is perilous. Although the empire boasts an extensive road network, journeys are long, uncomfortable, and fraught with risk. Inns are crowded and unsanitary. Bandits and wild animals pose constant threats. Taxes are burdensome and persistent, funding the military and infrastructure. Non-payment risks harsh penalties. The economy depends heavily on production and tribute, but wealth is concentrated among the elite. The military demands great sacrifice. Soldiers endure rigorous training and brutal combat. Many never return home. Military service offers advancement, but at a high cost. Nightfall does not bring respite. Lanterns flicker in windows and streets. Taverns and bathhouses buzz with activity. Yet many face nights filled with hunger, sickness, or anxiety. Sleep is often disturbed and brief. For a modern person thrust into this world, the absence of sanitation, health care, security, and comfort would quickly erode strength and will. Daily survival would demand resilience, toughness, and fortune. Enduring even a single day in ancient Rome was a testament to human endurance amid adversity. The empire's splendor masked the relentless hardships its people endured. A world where survival was never guaranteed and the cost of living was steep.